change today. Last video we talked about just percent of, how to find the percent of something. That was A equals P percent of B, where B is your base. Okay, that was our percent of last video. This time we do percent change. Percent change is when something is changed by a percentage of itself. That's the key. You have to identify the base and change it by a percentage of that. Let's do a pretty simple example here. The value of a $200 baseball card increases by 10% each year. Well, in most cases, 10% growth is extremely high, actually. Let's look at how this works. I first want to find 10% of 200. 10% of 200 is found by doing 0.1 times 200, which we should be able to know is 20. Now, if it's increasing by 10%, here's what I just found. I just found the 10%. It's 200. I now have to add that, or 20, I'm sorry. I have to add that 20 onto my initial 200. The card is now worth $220. So if the card's worth 200 now, in a year, I would expect it to be worth 220. Something kind of crazy happens, and we're not going to deal with this today, but I want to just point out what happens. Let's say we go for another year. So let's say right now the card is worth $220, and it's going to grow by 10% again. Well, I have to find 10% of 220. 10% of 220 is 22, not just 20, but 22. So if I add that 22 to 220, it's 242. You'll note this grew by 20, but this grew by 22. Why? Because there's more stuff to take the percentage of. Initially, it was out of 200, but we added 20 to it. Now it's growing by 22 because there's more stuff to take the percentage of. Now, like I said, that's something that we're going to discuss more in the future. It's not going to come up today. Today we'll just do like 1% change at a time, not multiple years over and over and over. But I want you to just be aware of how this can work and change if you do things repeatedly. It's not going to be the same growth or same shrink every single time. Okay, there's two ways to set up percent change. Here's the equation form. Here's the proportion form. Most of you are probably going to prefer this way because it's got steps you can follow really clearly. However, those steps are kind of cumbersome. This way is a little bit tougher to understand, but it's faster. So I'll show you both ways and let you pick. Just like last time, A stands for the amount. You can think of that as the part or the thing that comes out of the percentage. B stands for your base. That's your whole, where things are coming from, what the percentage comes from. R is actually the percent as a decimal. If you're wondering why I use the letter R, it's because we call it the rate. Eventually, these percentages become rates, like an interest rate or a tax rate. So we use R for rate, but I could have just easily written this. In fact, in previous classes I have. You can call it 1 plus or minus the percent if you want. The proportion has a few pieces to it. It's called new minus old over old equals percent change over 100. New and old stand for like the initial amount compared to the resulting final amount. So this old, this is like our base, and it appears twice. Whereas new is the new thing, and percent change will be the value that we calculate pretty often, or a value that we work with. So let me do some examples. I've recopied down those formulas here. Sales tax in California is 7.25% in 2020. If the original cost of a Nintendo Switch is $300, what is the total price including tax? Now, I live in Oregon where we don't have sales tax, and I think that's too bad because that means my property taxes are way too high. But whenever I go to California, I'll have like $2 in cash, and I'll try to buy two like dollar burgers at McDonald's, and I never have enough money because I always forget about the stinking sales tax. 7.25% is a pretty high sales tax. I don't think it's the highest in the country, but it's pretty high. If you're going to buy a Switch for $300, it's also going to include 7.25% of that $300 added on at the end. So the way that this would work is this right here would be my R if I was going to use this formula. And this right here is my base. I'm trying to find the amount afterwards. So if I set up a equals b times 1 plus r, well, my base is 300, and my r is 0.0725. You take that interest rate, or this sales tax rate, and you make it a decimal. So what I'm really going to calculate is 300 times 1.0725. And that's a pretty quick calculation. $321.75. The sales tax added $21.75, which is pretty annoying when you're buying it, but pretty annoying if you live in a state that doesn't have sales tax and somebody comes from out of state and buys a Switch, and it's like, no, throw our government some money, come on. To do it by the percent change proportion, right over here, this 300 is the old. The total price is the new. It's the thing we're trying to find. And this right here is our percent change. Now what's different about this is when I set it up, I'm going to do new minus old over old equals percent change over 100. Well, I know what the percent change is. It's 7.25, and that I don't convert to a decimal because it's already divided by 100. This divided by 100 is doing the percent work for us. Okay, so don't convert to a decimal, just divide it by 100 when you're doing the percent change proportion. That's a big difference. This one has a decimal over here, this one has a percent. And I get it's confusing because the percent has a decimal symbol in it, but understand it's a percentage. Okay, to solve this I cross multiply, and the cross multiplying has some distribution. So I'm going to work it out down here and then erase it all later. When I do 100 times x minus 300, I have to distribute that 100. Then 300 times 7.25 is the other side. So that becomes 100x minus 30,000 equals whatever 300 times 7.25 is. $21.75. These numbers seem kind of crazy at first, but just stick with it. Our next step is going to be to add 30,000 to both sides. So that means that 100x equals 32,175. Then we divide both sides by 100. That moves the decimal to the left. X equals 321.75, which, boom, just what we got last time. So here's where I'll say what I said to start with. The percent change equation over on the left is much, much less work, right? Look how much work all of this was compared to just this work over here. The percent change on the left is much less work, but I think it's tougher to understand, and that's how things just go in math. The thing that's harder to understand is usually easier to do. So if you can challenge yourself to work to understand the more complex thing, it'll actually make the calculations later on simpler and save you some time. Okay, this is me again reminding you that if that was too fast or you feel like you got lost on something, you can always just rewind and watch it again. And you can change your YouTube settings to show it at like 0.8 speed if you want to slow me down. I just don't want these videos to be so long you're not going to watch them. But I also want to give lots of examples. And that's how I'm always torn. Because if we weren't doing videos and we were sitting in class, I'd spend the whole class doing examples and then give you homework in the last 5 minutes. And so we're flipping that. And I want to give examples now without taking too long. So I'm going to go through them kind of quickly. Okay, we're still in California now, but it's a different type of problem. Now we know the total price. So sales tax has already gone in. If sales tax has already happened, what was the original price before the taxes? So we are trying to find the base. That's what we're trying to find, so I'm going to call that x. We know the amount. This is what I call A. We can also call it new, depending on what you want to use. So this would be old. We know the percent change is still 7.25, same percent change. So I can say that The final amount was 488. I don't know the initial amount, but I know it's going to be this. This is me using this formula. And again, the process to solve this is pretty simple. I'm just going to write 4.88 equals A, or you can use X if you want, equals this. And I divide both sides by 1.0725. So A equals 4.88 divided by 1.0725. 4.55. The burrito initially cost $4.55. You'll note there's some decimals coming afterwards. Like the actual calculation is 4.55011655, blah, 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 blah. The sales tax had to get rounded. So it wasn't, the actual calculation when you did sales tax wouldn't have been exactly 488. It would have been 488 points, like 4.88 something, something, something. So we dropped the rounding because we're just dealing with cents, and cents has to round to the nearest hundredth. If you wanted to set this up in the percent proportion, so I'm going to set it up this way now. It's new minus old, but we don't know what the old is, equals percent change, which is 7.25 divided by 100. Now this has two x's in it, so the solving is even a little bit more complex. We've been talking about solving problems in class lately, so I don't know if I need to go over this whole thing. When I cross multiply, I get 100 times 4.88 minus x, and then I cross multiply here and I get 7.25x. I'm going to distribute that 100, so that becomes 488 minus 100x equals 7.25x. I have an x on both sides of the equation, so I'm going to add this one to both sides, and that means that 488 equals 107.25x. Divide both sides by 107.25, which is really, really similar to this. Instead of 4.88, it's 488. I'm going to get the same value, 4.55 equals x. If you're hearing my phone ding in the background, I apologize. Okay, two more. I'm going to do them even quicker. Whoa. A monkey grew from 6 feet to 20 feet because some plot happened to it. Like it got stuck in a radioactive, box, or some chemical fell in it, or something is happening in this movie, and the monkey gets really big. What was the percent change? We are trying to find R now. This is what we don't know. I know the starting amount. I know the ending amount. So if I take A, B equals A times 1 plus or minus R. It's plus or minus because it's growth or decay, getting bigger or smaller. I probably should have said that earlier. You use plus if it's percent change to increase. You use minus if it's percent decrease. But we now know the starting amount. Gosh, I got those backwards. Let's start this over, Grant. If I'm going to use this formula up here, I'm trying to find the rate right now. I know the starting amount. It was 6. That's my base. My base is 6. I know the ending amount. It was 20. So I know that 20 equals 6 times 1 plus R. You might be asking, why is there plus or minus? And I should have talked about that earlier. It's plus if you have growth, minus if you have decay. So this one's going to be a minus instead of a plus. Solve this. So first, I could distribute the 6 first if I wanted to, but I'll just divide both sides by 6. I'm just going to write 20 divided by 6 equals 1 plus R. Then subtract the 1 from both sides. And I'm going to calculate. 20 divided by 6 is 3.6. Subtract 1 from that. 2.6, I think. 2.3. I was wrong. The growth rate was 233%. Because see, here's what we have to understand. This is 233%. It grew 14 feet. That's what we just found. 14 feet is 233% of 6. So it's 3 times taller, but its percent growth is less than 3 times. Okay? It's kind of a tough idea to always wrap your head around, but we're trying to find the percentage of the change. It's always the change that we're playing with. That's what new minus old is finding you. It's finding you the change, and then you find the percentage of that change. Well, the change here was 14 feet, and 14 feet is 233% of the initial 6 feet. If we set this up by the proportion, over on the right, it would look like this. New minus old over old equals percent change over 100. You cross multiply, you divide. And that is how you get your 233. Okay, last one. Diapers are on sale for 20% off. Okay, that means we're losing it. This is the first one we've done that's decrease. I'll set up the proportion first. The new price is 30. We're trying to find the old price. So I'm going to do new minus old over old equals percent change. And here's what's super important. Make it negative. It's dropping 20%. It's 20% off. Therefore, make this a negative 20. Cross multiply and solve, you'll figure it out. I'm not going to go through that. You should know how to do that now. You cross multiply and you solve. If you're going to do it by the equation, it would be the new price is 30. We don't know the beginning price, but we do know it's 1 minus 0.2, because 20% is 0.2 as a decimal. And here's a major idea I want you to understand, okay? If something is 20% off, well, 1 minus 0.2 is just 0.8. If something is 20% off, that means you are keeping 80%. Terribly important. If something is 20% off, you're keeping 80%. And that's what this is doing. That's showing us, okay, we're losing 20%, so what's left? Because remember, the number 1 is really 1.0. It's really 100%. That number 1 represents 100%, and then we take off 20% of the 100%. In the same way with growth, if you add 7.25%, that means you're keeping 107.25%. If you're adding 7.2%, you're keeping 107.2%. That's what this is doing. Is here's your first 100%, add on some more. So I do 30 divided by 0.8, whatever that is. If you're checking at home, it's 37.5. It initially cost $37.50. It now costs $30 because 20% was taken away. All right, I think this has been too long. Percent change is a thing. You do stuff with it. Always know what your base is. Base. Next video, we solve formulas where we have like perimeter of a rectangle is 2 width plus 2 length. To solve that for length, I would get the L by itself. So I subtract 2W, divide by 2. There, I just solved for length. I'm the best. Well done. Okay, here's a video that I've been trying to make for a long time. Watch what happens when I animate these 2 points. I've got 2 circles of the same size that are just orbiting around that center point. But because they started at different points, they actually form an ellipse. You might call this an oval, but it's an ellipse. Is that cool? I don't know. I hope so. I also hope that you'll think about subscribing or liking or hitting notifications or telling your friends or just sending me money in bags. Please think about all those things. Thank you.